One of the benefits of using a jury to begin with is that you're not afraid that any one LLM is going to be super biased because you have the rest of the ensemble to rely on to course correct for like a bad judgment.
Data is treated as the dirty little secret of AI. When it makes headlines, it's usually for a bad reason. I'm Jennifer Ding from Encord. I'm a data scientist, data steward, and even a data festival organizer. I'm into data, and I think we should talk about it more. That is what AI Data Chats is for.
In today's AI Data Chat, we are here with Justin Zhao, independent researcher and former senior software engineer at Google Research and Predibase. Welcome, Justin. What is our AI data topic for today, and what are you pairing it with?
Hi, Jennifer. Great to see you. So the data hot take that I have for you today is that LLM as a judge is not good enough, and we need LLM as a jury.
Amazing. And what drink are you pairing with this great topic?
So today I have with me a glass of acai juice with creatine dissolved inside.
Very creative. I love it. So to start today's chat, we invite you to give your AI data hot take on your topic.
Sure. So LLM as a judge is this concept where instead of asking human raters to judge whether something's good or bad, you can ask an LLM to do that for you directly. And many recent evaluations use LLMs as judges to score these outputs from other models. And they often just rely on a single model, a single good model like ChatGPT, particularly when it comes to things like subjective tasks where, there's not really a great single objective ground truth. I think there's this tension between how are we getting all these opinions from one system when the task itself is fundamentally something that you can have multiple opinions on. There's also other risks, like if you use a single LLM judge, it's prone to maybe intermodal bias, where it recognizes and prefers its own outputs. And then also just for many tasks, I think, such as those related to emotional intelligence, creative writing, and persuasiveness, the task itself just is fundamentally too subjective for there to be kind of one model to judge fairly. My hot take is that we should always be getting multiple opinions from multiple models. I actually wrote a paper called the Language Model Council, which explores this idea. I find that there's a lot of interesting benefits that come from doing this. It is more costly, and it does raise an interesting question of how many opinions is too many opinions, but there are definitely significant benefits just getting a second opinion. It's already worth it. Yeah.
Really interesting. So based on the research that you've conducted, what would your ideal language model council look like for the kinds of research you're working on now?
Yeah, so the ideal council configuration would look something like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and one of the Chinese LLMs like QN or DeepSeek. And then that would form the council. Yeah. In the paper, I used a council of size 20. So there were 20 different members. I also used AI models from Mistral and Cohere and also Alibaba, the QN model. But there is a lot of agreement. And I found that with councils of size 5, that was kind of like the sweet spot, where if you had more council members, more kind of jury members, the benefits were very marginal.
Fascinating finding that there was a lot of agreement across these different models trained from different companies in different countries. Where was there disagreement?
So I should say that overall, the task that I tested these on was a task that humans inherently didn't really agree on that much. So the level of human agreement was actually something like 51%. Humans were split across the board. And these LLMs, they're also kind of agreeing kind of at a similar level. You can also say they're disagreeing almost half the time. But what is interesting is that, when you have multiple council members, you can measure the agreement between any two pairs of these LLMs. And that allows you to find these sorts of like LLM friendships, so to speak. And you would expect that, these LLMs that come from the same company, like Claude Sonnet and Claude Opus, that they would be friends. But actually, that's not necessarily the case. Amongst all the families that I tested, Llama, the Llama family, was the most friendly within the family. But otherwise, I didn't actually see any very strong inter-family friendships.
Interesting to think of these different personalities within the model families. Any surprising LLM BFF pairings that emerged?
You might be surprised that this model from Alibaba, QN, it's really liked GPT 3.5. It had like a very significantly high preference for GPT 3.5. And then also another significant one is Mixtral, the 8 by 7 billion parameter model that was open sourced. I think maybe they call it Mistral Small now. That had a very strong affinity for Llama 3, 70 billion. You know, what's interesting is Mistral Large really dislikes Llama 3, 8 billion. So you have one Mistral model that really likes the older sibling or like the bigger sibling of the Llama family. And then you have the Mistral Large really disliking the youngest member.
Love to hear that somehow these kinds of friendships emerged despite being developed in very different contexts. I'm also curious, in your investigation, if your study revealed anything interesting to you about the potential sources of the pre-training data for some of these foundation models.
It's a good question. And people, you could think like, if these two LLMs are expressing the same preferences, or, you know, if they're friends, like maybe that's like an indication that they're trained from the same data. Just from this kind of LLM as a judge, LLM as a jury sort of work, I didn't see anything that stood out as like very obvious. I didn't see anything that was kind of cross-organizational in terms of, it's very likely that Mistral was distilled from ChatGPT. I didn't see anything like that. But what was interesting was that when you had two members of the family compete against each other, like in sort of a pairwise arena type of setting, the bigger model would almost always win over the smaller model. So if you took like a Mistral model and a Llama model, sometimes the Mistral model wins, sometimes the Llama model wins. It's very subjective. Different LLM judges have different opinions on it. But if you compare like a big Llama model with a small Llama model, you have a much more consistency across the entire jury that the bigger one is better than the smaller one. And you see this with also the Claude models as well as the QN models. Very notably, it was like the QN 110 billion parameter model had a 90+% win rate against the small 32 billion parameter QN model. So yeah, it's almost like if you compare, two people from different families, it's harder, more subjective to compare. But if you compare someone to their younger, like you compare like an older brother and a younger brother, it becomes very clear that like the older brother is more muscular or something. And like, people are like, yeah, I think the older brother is going to be more qualified here.
Interesting dynamics.
Yeah,
with these more muscular or bigger models with the smaller models.
Yeah.
I've seen some interesting posts on Reddit. I think it was the Logo Llama subreddit where someone asks different models to describe themselves in human terms. So what kind of human do they embody? And I'm wondering for the LLMs in your council, if LLMs can be described as the average human representation for the humans whose data they've been trained on, what kind of average humans do you think your LLM council members embodied?
I don't know. I think that's a very interesting question. And that's kind of what inspired this work to begin with. Like you can imagine that in the future, there's not going to be one LLM that rules them all. Every country may have its own geopolitically optimized, aligned LLM. Maybe you ask the Chinese LLM from Alibaba what it thinks it is, and it says, I'm a Chinese person. And then you ask like a ChatGPT what it thinks it is, and it's like, oh, I'm like a Western LLM. I don't know what kind of signals you would get there, but yes, certainly people have found that all these LLMs are biased in different ways, and they have different personalities and different cultural values. And yeah, I don't know how directly traceable that is to like precisely which pieces of data they've been trained on, but definitely in terms of like maybe one Western organization is probably going to imbue this with more data aligned to what it thinks is good. Maybe a different definition than a different LLM from a different organization or a different country.
So when it comes to using LLM judges or LLM councils for evaluations, are there any biases you think should be top of mind that we should make sure to avoid?
In my study, I focused a lot on self-enhancement bias, which is LLMs preferring themselves or preferring their family. that's something to kind of watch out for. One of the benefits of using a jury to begin with is that you're not afraid that any one LLM is going to be super biased, because you have the rest of the ensemble to rely on to course correct for like a bad judgment. And, this is like speaking to the merits of democracy to begin with, because there's, many, many, many other people to kind of drown out the malicious vote. And I actually tried to do a very similar experiment with the council, where I replaced half the council with adversarial council members. And so these would be LLM judges that they're not even real LLMs, but they basically give a random vote every time, or they're always picking the same. They're always going to choose one specific LLM all the time. And what you see is that the quality of the rankings and the scores does degrade, but the larger that the count is to begin with, the less significant that degradation. So it kind of speaks to the benefits of, it's good if you have, 10 people on your team, because if there's 3 bad people, they're still okay. It's kind of advocating for, the larger council size anyways. Yeah.
Fascinating to hear these parallels from best practices in human decision-making sort of translate over to the LLM decision-making case. So the wisdom of the crowd and having different perspectives, avoiding sort of an incestuous situation maybe where you have the same LLM family generating results and the same family also evaluating those results. So really, really interesting work. The final question, what kinds of questions do you think are best fit for LLM councils?
So I think when you have a very strong sense of a ground truth, you don't need LLM councils. In fact, you don't even need LLM as a judge at all to begin with. But the moment you're marching into territory where things are subjective, open-ended, like who wrote the best summary, or, who's the most emotionally intelligent, as I did in my paper, who was the most persuasive here. These types of tasks are ones where getting multiple opinions, either from a language model council or multiple ratings from the same LLM. This is where there's a lot of benefits that you'll see from vote smoothing, where like a spurious bad vote or a spurious bad LLM won't be significantly impactful in your final evaluations.
So now we'll go into our rapid fire round of the 5 questions we ask every speaker.
Nice. Yeah, sounds good.
What scale of data are you working with these days?
So these days I'm working with smaller data sets. I would say, a few hundred megabytes at most, 10,000 examples or so.
Any favorite data sets you've come across recently?
So I really like this data set called Simple QA from OpenAI. It's a factuality benchmark.
What do you think is an AI data challenge that should be receiving more attention?
I think data decay and data obsolescence is a really important problem that hasn't been solved well.
What do you think 2025 is the year of for AI data?
For AI data, I think it has to be agents, both collecting the data as well as evaluating these agents. There's so much to do.
Final question to close out today's chat. How was your pairing of your drink with today's data topic?
It was good. It was good. Creatine keeps me focused, and the acai has antioxidants, which is good for my health.
Delicious and functional. I love it. Thanks for joining us, Justin. Where can we find more of your work?
The paper is out on Archive. If you just search Language Model Council, it should be the first link. And otherwise, I'm presenting this at ACL, and I think there's going to be a recording of me giving a talk.
Well, that wraps up this AI data chat. You can find links to our speaker's work in the episode description. If you'd like to share your thoughts or suggest a speaker, email us at aidatachats@encore.com.